Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on August 4th, 2026. What you just saw was a video of an apparent Iranian drone strike launched last night against a U.S. military base in the Gulf Arab autocracy of Kuwait. Iran reportedly launched this drone attack despite the fact that Trump chickened out again this past weekend and has not bombed Iran since last week. Today, we'll provide the latest news in this criminal war of aggression on Iran, including an analysis of what this all means, this apparent drone strike on the U.S. base in Kuwait. And we'll also discuss the latest treachery from Trump's so-called Board of Peace, record levels of emigration from Israel, and the ongoing bizarre behavior of the global oil markets. Before we get into it, please remember to like and share this video if you find it to be informative. And if you're not already a subscriber to our channel, please do become one and help us to expand the reach of our unapologetic, on-the-ground resistance journalism. So with that, let's begin. This morning, the video I just showed you began circulating widely on social media, including resistance Telegram channels. Arab media reported that the explosion documented in this video was heard as far away as Basra, the Iraqi port city on the Persian Gulf. Then, soon after the video began circulating, at least two Israeli media outlets reported that Iran had indeed struck a U.S. military base in Kuwait last night. Here is the first of those reports from I-24 News in Israel. IRGC conducts overnight drone attack on a U.S. base in Kuwait. A source familiar with the details confirmed this to I-24 News and stated that the attack was carried out using 3 drones. And interestingly, a similar report appeared in the Jerusalem Post. This again from this morning. The IRGC has attacked a U.S. military base in Kuwait. A source familiar with the details confirmed to the Jerusalem Post on Tuesday morning. So somebody is really probably an Israeli, some maybe from the intelligence community, the government, the military, seems anxious to put the Israeli media on notice about this attack. And again, the attack, it is stated, was carried out using at least 3 drones. Now, what is notable, of course, about this attack is that it is coming, as I indicated at the outset of this report, despite the fact that the United States has not bombed Iran since last week. Now, I should caution you that there has been no official confirmation, as far as I can tell, from the Iranian military or government that it is indeed behind a drone attack launched last night on a U.S. Air Force base in Kuwait. But it would be consistent with the apparent decision of the Iranian leadership a couple of weeks ago to take the initiative in this war. And I'm referring specifically to the decision to attack a U.S. Air Force base, an important one in Jordan, a couple of days after Trump unilaterally announced a so-called pause in his criminal bombardment of Iran. And I must say that if in fact the Iranians are behind this attack, although I always prefer the option of peace to war, I think that in the circumstances in which they find themselves against an implacable genocidal enemy like the Trump regime, it is absolutely the right thing to do to take the initiative and to dictate the pace at which this war is conducted. It is going to be conducted against Iran, whether they like it or not. And it is quite clear at this stage that Trump and Netanyahu are bent on the destruction of Iran. And the only thing holding them back is Iran's ability to inflict devastating retaliation on the region, and particularly the oil infrastructure of Israel and the Gulf Arab autocracies, which would have catastrophic consequences for the global economy and indeed for the U.S. economy. That is what is holding back the United States, but the United States is waging a multifaceted war against Iran, which includes an ongoing blockade of Iranian ports, which is designed to crush the Iranian economy and to inflict severe suffering on the innocent population. On top of the theft of the Iranian assets many years ago and the maximum pressure sanctions that the United States has imposed on Iran. So there is a war being waged in every conceivable sense against Iran, and the best way for Iran to emerge victorious in this war, as it is on the path to doing, is to dictate the pace at which the war is fought, and to decide on its own terms when the hot phases of the war will resume and when they will be suspended. If it allows the US to make that decision, the US will always pause the war, the hot phase of the war, when it is in US interest to do so, and will resume it when it is in US interest to do so, and will always try to time the resumption and suspension of hostilities to disadvantage Iran to a maximum degree. So if this is what Iran is doing, I strongly believe that that is the best course of action. And quite apart from the necessity of maintaining the initiative, as I say, there is an economic war being waged on Iran. So even if there has been a pause in the actual bombardment of Iran, that doesn't mean that the United States government isn't continuing its efforts to bring about the destruction of the country. It quite clearly is doing that. So you don't have to take my word for it when I say that Iran has seized the initiative in this war. That is, in fact, the view of the neocons in Britain. And I'll show you here an article that was just published by the Financial Times, as neoconservative a British media outlet as you're likely to find. And this article, by the way, is entitled "Iran Sets Pace in War with Donald Trump," and written by Jacob Judah and Steve Chavez in Washington. After 6 months of war, they say, with Donald Trump, Iran can claim to have seized one significant advantage. Washington is increasingly fighting at a pace set by Tehran. Over the past 2 weeks, Tehran has taken the initiative, launching preemptive attacks designed to exhaust the U.S. and frighten its Arab allies into acquiescing to Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. And by the way, this article was published before the news about the apparent drone attack last night on the U.S. base in Kuwait. And they continue, they write, "It struck against an American military installation in Jordan, breaking a lull in the fighting last week with a surprise attack." It wasn't really a surprise, but that's another matter. Iran and its regional proxies have widened the theater of conflict, disrupting shipping in Red Sea, striking Syria for the first time, and being suspected of a drone attack in Egypt. By the way, the Iranians have categorically denied that they're responsible for that attack on an U.S. LNG tanker in an Egyptian port. And it's entirely possible that that was a false flag perpetrated by Israel, or perhaps even by the United States, in order to draw Egypt into this war. The article goes on to conclude that this is not something that is likely to be to Washington's liking, and that this is causing considerable angst to the criminal Trump regime. Now, it's not just the Iranians who have seized the initiative. So too have their allies in Yemen, Ansar Allah. Today, the Ansar Allah leadership announced that they had launched a drone operation against sensitive targets in Saudi Arabia's Najran airport. These were, according to the Yemenis, military positions, and that they used a drone in order to conduct this attack. And they say that it directly hit the sensitive facilities and targets in that airport. I've seen no external confirmation of this, either from the Saudis. I've not seen any video evidence to back it up. But the Yemenis tend to be quite truthful in their accounts about their military operations. And what's interesting about this is that the reason for this attack was apparently that some Saudi drones entered Yemeni airspace. Now, I haven't seen reports that those Saudi drones actually did any damage or hurt anyone. It appears that the mere fact that they violated Yemeni airspace was enough to cause the Yemeni military leadership to launch a retaliatory strike on a Saudi airport. So again, it looks like Ansar Allah too is taking the initiative, taking the fight to the proxies of Washington in the region. And there's also this report that 6 Saudi flagged tankers have been detected routing via the Cape of Good Hope. That's the southern coast of the continent of Africa, to avoid the blockade in the Bab al-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea implemented by Ansar Allah. And this person goes on to write that one Taiwan to Yanbu voyage, Yanbu is the Saudi oil exporting port on the Red Sea, one Taiwan to Yanbu voyage nearly doubling from approximately 24 to 56 days, as Brett Erickson notes in the reply to this post. 56 is more than doubling the time it takes to go from Yanbu to Taiwan. In any case, this not only delays the shipment of Saudi oil to Asian markets considerably, but because the voyage is so much longer, it also increased the cost. So this too is bodes ill for the price of oil in the weeks and months ahead. There's no indication whatsoever that this situation, the Bab al-Mandab Strait, is going to be resolved anytime soon, because the condition that the Yemenis have set for lifting the blockade is that the Saudis lift their criminal genocidal blockade on Yemen, something that's been in effect for more than a decade. And I haven't seen a hint of willingness on the part of the Saudi autocracy to do that. So it looks like this blockade is going to stay in effect for some time and may well intensify. For now, it's only limited, as I understand it, to Saudi oil tankers. Other ships are being allowed through the Bab al-Mandab Strait. That may change if this war intensifies. Now, all of this is causing the Donald to become increasingly agitated. After the Iranians denied repeatedly and strenuously that they were meeting with U.S. officials yesterday, which is what Trump said on the weekend. He said that there were going to be meetings to resume negotiations with the Iranians on Monday during the day, which conveniently happened to be the day on which the markets, the oil markets, reopened for trading. Well, the Iranians denied all of this, so Trump puts out this wacko tweet post on Truth Social in the last 24 hours. Iranian leadership is unbelievably duplicitous. This coming from the world's worst pathological liar. And then he writes, they ask for a meeting. Some would say beg. No, the only person who would say beg is Donald Trump and the sycophants who surround him at the White House. And he says that there are more meetings scheduled in the immediate future. And they say openly and proudly that they're not having any discussions, that nothing is being talked about, and they're only dealing with Oman. They then go on to give their usual blather and saying the Strait of Hormuz will be operated powerfully by them when it is already completely controlled by the United States Navy and our blockade, or as some say, the United States wall of steel. Actually, there are no naval vessels that I can see in the Strait of Hormuz. What happens is they entice some civilian tankers to try to go through the strait using a lane that hugs the coast of Oman, and they provide an aerial escort, which typically means a helicopter or two guiding the vessel, but they're not sending their expensive naval vessels into the Strait of Hormuz because, as the U.S. Military understands all too well, they could be sunk. And all the reports are that the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz continues to be highly constrained, and that almost nobody is using that Omani lane now. And the few vessels that are going through the lane that has been authorized by Iran. So this is nothing but a pack of lies, which makes it, doubly ironic that he begins by accusing the Iranians of being duplicitous. In any event, all of his ranting and raving is not going to significantly alter the reality on the ground. And that is something that I think is becoming increasingly apparent to the Donald himself. Now, by the way, if there are meetings going on between U.S. and Iranian officials, then why are there no photographs to evidence these meetings? It's not unusual when dignitaries from countries get together to negotiate, even in circumstances of war. There will be photographs available to the media to show that they've actually convened for the meetings. Couldn't Donald easily have his underlings take a photo or two of the representatives of these governments getting together? But no, there's nothing like that. Furthermore, why would the Iranians meet with the U.S. government at this stage? After they were tricked into negotiating with Iran with the United States in June of last year, only to find themselves subjected to a war of aggression during 12 days in that month. And then after having been, deceived, or at least there was an attempt to deceive them again in February, there were negotiations happening. The Omanis reported that the Iranians were making significant concessions in those negotiations in February of this year. And then on February 28th, Israel and the United States launched this criminal war of aggression, murdering much of the top leadership of the country, including the martyred supreme leader Ali Khamenei. So then comes the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, which the United States violated from the very beginning and in every imaginable way within the first 2 weeks of its signing. There is absolutely no reason for the Iranians to believe that negotiating with these lunatics is going to lead anywhere. So Trump's claim to be in meetings with the Iranians in negotiations has absolutely no credibility. And the fact that he has a motive to lie, because this inevitably impacts the price of oil. The price of oil comes down whenever Trump makes some ridiculous claim that they're on the verge of a deal. Nobody should take any of this seriously. And I think that the Iranians are being quite honest when they say that they are only meeting with Oman. And the meeting with Oman, by the way, is for a very limited purpose. It's just to discuss or determine jointly whether they can agree upon a single lane on a temporary basis for shipping through the Strait of Hormuz to pass, pending the resolution of the critically important issues as to who will have custody or control of the Strait of Hormuz and whether ships will pay fees for passage, and if so, to whom and in what amount. These issues are going to take some time to work out. And so in the interim, all they're talking about, Iran and Oman, reportedly, is a temporary lane. And what's quite interesting about this report, which you see here in I-24 News, and you can find this as Israel's media outlet again and other media outlets, is that the plan, which appears to be taking shape, would give Tehran control over inbound shipping. Now, if you control who goes into the Persian Gulf, then you effectively control who can come out of it, because there's only one way into the Persian Gulf, and that's through the Strait of Hormuz. There is no other maritime route into the Persian Gulf. So if you give Iran control over who enters the Persian Gulf, you're effectively giving Iran control over all maritime traffic in and out of the Persian Gulf. And this may just be a clever way of making it seem as though Oman will retain some authority over who gets to go in and out of the Persian Gulf. But at the end of the day, if the Omanis do agree to this, it's going to be quite a significant blow to Trump's efforts to assert control over the Strait of Hormuz. And the situation overall has become so desperate that CENTCOM, the arm of the U.S. military that's responsible for West Asia, is now soliciting opinions from its soldiers for new, creative, and unconventional ways to pressure and punish Iran. You can see this up on the screen. This was posted by the Hormuz letter yesterday. A source close to CENTCOM says, quote, CENTCOM is looking at everything, acknowledging it needs to reevaluate the strategy, close quote. The crowdsourcing style query, which military officials said was unusual over email, is one sign of the limited and potentially unpalatable options available to Trump to force Iran into a deal on his terms. This comes a week after a U.S. official said Trump is exasperated and there was not a real strategy for how long or what they should do. You'd think that the rocket scientists running CENTCOM would know that an email of this nature sent broadly to its military personnel was highly likely to be leaked to the media, but apparently that didn't deter them from soliciting these opinions. Now, with that, let's turn to developments in the bizarro world of the global oil markets. This is a report of statements made by Amin Hassan al-Nasser, the CEO of the giant Saudi Aramco oil company. He announced the suspension of the supply of a huge amount of oil to world markets, referring to the deep effects of security tensions in the region. The Persian Gulf crisis, as they call it, has removed, according to him, 2.6 billion barrels of oil from the market. That is an absolutely massive amount of oil that would normally have been distributed to consumers around the world, but that has been deprived to them because of this war of aggression launched by Trump and Netanyahu on February 28th. Of course, one would think in these circumstances that the price of oil would be going through the roof. That has not happened, certainly not currently happening. I'll come back to the price of oil in a moment. And there was an interesting article on oilprice.com about what is going on here. It was authored by one of their columnists, Irina Slav, published on July 28th. And she wrote that oil prices ignore the warning signs in physical markets. Oil markets remain surprisingly optimistic despite major supply disruptions. That optimism is increasingly being tested as record refining margins, tightening fuel supplies, and declining global inventories point to growing stress in physical oil markets rather than futures. The current pause in hostilities does not resolve underlying supply constraints, and physical fundamentals deserve more attention than short-term price movements. I completely concur. And in the body of the article, she points out that some of this optimism may be arising from the fact that back in 2022, when Russian forces intervened militarily in Ukraine, and then they were hit with sanctions on their oil, the Russians, the price of a barrel of oil spiked to about 120 US very quickly. And people were surprised to see that the market adapted. And basically, what happened was somehow Russian oil found its way out and continued to flow to customers around the world. And she writes here that eventually for those doing that betting, in other words, that the market this time is going to adapt as it did in the case of the sanctions on Russia in 2022, warning signs are flashing, especially in oil products. Crack spreads are at all-time highs. This is the difference between the price of oil and the price of refining a barrel of oil. I believe that's how you define the crack spreads. And that this is reflecting an increasingly tighter market, with some analysts suggesting this may only be the beginning. In fact, some analysts have been warning since the spring that if the war extended beyond June, all bets would be off, with global crude inventories depleted and shortages emerging in fuels. This is exactly what is happening, albeit perhaps more slowly than many would imagine given the dramatic nature of developments. Global oil inventories are not yet empty, but they are being drawn down considerably, with the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve nearing a critical level. Gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel supply is tightening because demand is outpacing supply, suggesting that the disruption in Middle East energy exports have indeed been severe enough to warrant a closer look than just the future markets. Now, I just want to comment on this. Russia is a very different case than the Persian Gulf. Russia is a massive country with huge coastlines. It has a Black Sea coastline, a Pacific coastline. It has an Arctic coastline, the Baltic Sea. In addition, so it has many ways to get oil out. Very, very difficult, given the size of the country and the length of its coastlines, to stop what they call these shadow fleet tankers from delivering oil. Plus, it can deliver oil to huge markets like those of China and India by land. And China and India, particularly China, are determined to buy Russian oil, whether or not they're being threatened with sanctions by Washington. So this is very different from the Persian Gulf, where you have huge major oil and gas producers like Qatar and Kuwait and Bahrain having really only one way to get their oil out, and that is by maritime transportation through the Strait of Hormuz. And even Saudi Arabia, which does have another option, the Red Sea, the pipeline from eastern to western Saudi Arabia, its capacity is limited, and it can't make up for all or even substantially all of the lost oil exports because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Plus, you now have the blockade on the Bab al-Mandeb Strait for Saudi oil tankers. And as I mentioned, this means that they now have to take a much longer route. So this is a very different environment from the Russian oil environment. And what that means is reasonable investors would not expect there to be anywhere near the degree of market adaptation this time around as there was back in 2022. Now, a professor who comments extensively on developments in the oil markets by the name of Cochran, he came out with an interesting post on July 31st. I want to share this with you. At the start of this war, I suggested that the U.S. Treasury Department was trading oil futures with Treasury money to suppress prices. They were then forced to sell from the SPR. When that goes low, Japan suddenly started selling its reserves of oil, and their currency saw steady intervention. When the war looked like peace had been reached, Japan stopped selling its oil, but also had much less currency intervention. Now the war is back on. The US publicly makes a massive intervention in the Japanese yen. I suspect Japan will in turn release more oil reserves. I believe the US Treasury has dangerously and stupidly tried to use cash-settled futures to intervene in the US oil market repeatedly since the start of this war. If they cannot keep the price of oil suppressed, there will be biblically catastrophic results for both the global economy and the US Treasury, all at the expense of the taxpayer. So I'm going to try to break this down for you and tell you what I think he's saying. I think what he's saying, and there have been other reports about this from oil industry experts, suspicions, not proof, hard proof, but suspicions, that the US Treasury is secretly selling oil futures, which are effectively contracts to purchase or sell oil at some point in the future, let's say 2 months down the road. And they're offering to sell that oil at a very low price in a 2 months time. And if in fact it fails the U.S. government in keeping the price of oil at or below the price in those futures contracts, when it comes time for them to deliver the oil, the U.S. Treasury Department deliver the oil to the buyers, the people on the other end of these contracts, they're going to have to go out into the physical market and buy the oil to satisfy their obligations under the contracts. And if the price of oil in the physical market is much higher than the contract price, then the U.S. Treasury is going to lose a ton of money, huge amounts of money. Therefore, the U.S. taxpayer could get hit enormously depending upon what happens to the price of oil in the next few months. And this would be a double whammy because U.S. taxpayers are already paying themselves higher prices for gas. And of course, products that are affected by the price of oil are themselves, their prices are being inflated. So they're getting hit once when they purchase gas or other products that are affected by the increase in the price of oil. And then they'll get hit again if and when the U.S. Treasury has to deliver oil at prices that are well below the current market price of oil some point down the road. In effect, what may be happening is that the U.S. government is secretly subsidizing the price of oil for the entire world. And this could indeed become extremely costly, possibly to the tune of trillions of dollars, depending on how things play out. Is this what's actually going on? I don't know. Is it entirely possible? Are there indications that it's going on? Yes. Is this something of which the U.S. government is capable? Absolutely. Just think about all the times that the U.S. government secretly spent gigantic amounts of money on a war, and we didn't find out about that until years after the fact, that a war that was thought to have cost hundreds of billions of dollars, in fact, cost trillions of dollars to the United States. And so I don't think that the Trump regime would have any hesitation in engaging this type of behavior to suppress the price of oil, even if it believed it was taking enormous risk with U.S. taxpayer money. Time will tell what indeed has caused the price of oil to remain so low. And in fact, the last time I checked about an hour ago, the price of oil had actually fallen again today, despite this attack, this reported attack on a Saudi airport by Yemen, despite all of these Saudi oil tankers having to be diverted and take the much longer journey and much more costly journey around the continent of Africa to Asian markets, despite the report of the Iranians being on the verge of a deal which would give them strict control over inbound traffic, despite the reported attack on the U.S. airbase in Kuwait. Despite all of this, the price of oil today thus far has fallen in excess of 2% and is trading just below $82 last time I checked. Now, this is still well above the price at which it was trading a barrel of Brent crude at the beginning of the year, which was a little bit north of $60, but it's well below the high point during this war, which was up close to 120, and certainly far below what many experts expected to happen. So all bets are off, I would say, on what is going to happen in the months ahead. And I continue to believe that these shenanigans cannot persist, and that we are going to see an explosion in the price of oil sometime in the next couple of months. With that, let us turn to the latest developments in the Gaza Strip, ground zero for Israel's ongoing genocidal wars in the region. The Board of Peace has just put out another statement regarding the deal that it had negotiated with the Palestinian resistance to implement, it was a roadmap, they called it, for the implementation of Trump's supposed peace plan. And what that deal provided for, as I explained in a report a couple of days ago, was the gradual decommissioning of heavy weapons by the Palestinian resistance. They would gradually turn them over to a technocratic Palestinian authority in the Gaza Strip, not to Israel, and they weren't going to be destroyed either. They were going to be handed over gradually, and the handover of those heavy weapons was going to be linked to a gradual Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. It currently physically occupies somewhere around 70% of the Gaza Strip in flagrant violation of multiple agreements. So the Board of Peace puts out this post stating as follows: as part of the process of decommissioning weapons in Gaza and enabling the transition to civilian governance and creating a safer future in the region for both Israelis and Palestinians, a meeting was held earlier today, Monday, so this was yesterday, between High Representative Nikolai Mladenov, together with the Board of Peace team, and the child-murdering Benjamin Netanyahu. The meeting was constructive and detailed. Israel and the Board of Peace share a common understanding of the ultimate objectives. The goal is clear and is not in question: the complete decommissioning of weapons. Notice it doesn't say heavy weapons, it says weapons, period. So this would include light weapons in the Strip, and transition away from rule by the gun to civilian governance. Reaching it will be a process, and that process will be set out in the next phase of the work. Contrary to inaccurate reports, we note that withdrawal of the IDF beyond the yellow line will take place only once decommissioning is complete. Not once it is started, once it is complete, as Hamas committed to the mediators. This is what they're now claiming. This applies to light weapons, heavy weapons, and the tunnels alike. So basically, the victims of this ongoing genocide have to be divested of all their weapons, which are peanuts compared to the destructive power of Israel. But Israel gets to remain in the Gaza Strip until that process is complete. Now, once they've given up their weapons, what would deter Israel from actually finishing them off? At this stage, the only deterrents they possess are those weapons, the destructive power of which, as I said, is vastly smaller than that of Israel's destructive power. No sane, decent person would insist that the victims of a genocide be divested of their light weaponry or any of their weaponry before the perpetrator of the genocide is divested of its own far more destructive weaponry. That's how a normal, humane, decent human being would go about resolving this genocide, bringing it to an end. But instead, these racist lunatics on the Board of Peace are now insisting, contrary to the agreement that they struck with the Palestinian resistance, that the Palestinian resistance be completely disarmed before Israel withdraws even an inch from the territory that it illegally occupies. Now, let's take a look. I showed this to my audience a few days ago when I talked about the agreement. Let's take a look at what the agreement actually says. This is Clause 8. A process to decommission and store heavy weapons. Notice it says heavy weapons, military production sites, depots of weapons, and tunnels shall begin after completing the remaining commitments under Sharm el-Sheikh Protocol. The entry of the NCAG, that's the Technocratic Independent Palestinian Authority, and deployment of the International Stabilization Force. This process shall be administered and implemented by NCAG in a gradual, sequential, and time-bound manner according to an implementation timetable that shall be completed within 14 days after all parties approve of the roadmap, which could be extended by a decision by IVC. This process shall be linked to an Israeli withdrawal in phases from the areas under its control and the decommissioning of armed militias in accordance with Article 10 of this roadmap. So what is supposed to happen clearly, and this is evidenced elsewhere in the agreement. This was published, by the way, on the Board of Peace X account, what you're seeing here, just a few days ago. what was agreed was that the two things would happen in concert with each other. There would be a decommissioning process that would happen alongside a withdrawal of Israeli forces process. They would begin at the same time, these two processes, and end at the same time. Instead, what this liar, Mladenov, is now saying after meeting with the child murderer is that, oh no, despite what we told you on our X account a few days ago, in fact, what the Palestinian resistance agreed was that they would give up all their weapons, not just heavy weapons, to the NCAG, and only then would Israel begin to withdraw. Again, this just drives home the point that the Board of Peace is a fraud. It is nothing but a cover for Israel's ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. And in that regard, I'll show you the report of the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza on August, this is for August 3rd, 2nd to 3rd. During that 24-hour period, there were 19 martyrs, 18 new martyrs, 18 people killed by the genocidal Israeli entity, and one succumbed to an injury. 35 injuries had arrived in Gaza Strip hospitals in the prior 24 hours. Since the ceasefire, October 11th, the number of people killed by Israel, 1,250, over 4,000 injured, and 804 bodies revealed. The total death toll from the aggression, of course, this number is nowhere near the actual death toll in Gaza, but the official death toll, these are the bodies that the Gaza Health Ministry has actually been able to collect and identify. It is 73,375 with 174,220 injuries. You know, this is well over 10% of the population of Gaza. This is just the official number, has been killed or wounded. Now, all of these fatalities, 1,250, and these over 4,000 injuries since the ceasefire came into effect, and this disgusting Board of Peace has done nothing, absolutely nothing to stop the carnage. Every single day, there are people being murdered in Gaza by the genocidal Israeli entity. So don't buy any of it, my friends. This genocide is ongoing and, as I've said many times, has expanded since the ceasefire to the West Bank and to South Lebanon. Now, despite all of the Israeli savagery, it cannot be concealed that that Israeli society continues to fall apart. So just as an example, there was a report today of yet another Israeli being arrested on charges of spying for Iran. This one is actually a settler. The most fanatical of the Zionists are even spying for Iran. And this individual the settler was arrested by Israeli security forces on suspicion of spying for Iranian intelligence in exchange for $15,000. According to a report by Israel's Channel 12, the individual was acting on instructions from Iranian operatives using detailed maps. He allegedly photographed and documented the residence and security measures of high-profile Israeli officials, including former military chief Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi and the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. Now, Israel is supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world. Relative to the vast majority of countries, it is indeed an affluent country. It's rather surprising that some fanatical Zionist settler would be willing to sell out the head of the Israeli military and the national security minister, potentially enabling Iran to kill them for a mere $15,000. But I guess that's the going rate for getting these lunatics to betray their genocidal entity. But a far more significance is reports emerging that emigration from Israel is at record levels. Here is a report that was published yesterday by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Emigration from Israel remained at a record high in 2025. Study finds about 90,000 Israelis left the country for at least 3 months in 2025, compared with an annual average of roughly 60,000 before 2023. Researchers warn that rising immigration could eventually threaten Israel's security and economy. And at the outset of the article, it says the findings suggest that the wave of emigration that began in 2023 likely remained high last year. A previous study found that those leaving included disproportionately large numbers of doctors, PhD holders, engineers, academics, and high-income earners. And that is if that trend persists, it will undoubtedly have a seriously negative impact on Israel's economy. Now, this was 2025. Since 2026, what has happened? Well, in 2025, there was a 12-day war with Iran during which Israel got pummeled. During this year, in the first half of this year, there was a 40-day war during which Israel was pummeled. And that war is not over. It is ongoing. And at any moment, as Israelis well understand, this whole thing could erupt. And they also have seen the reports, many Israelis, of depleted air defense systems, a lack of PAC-3 interceptors for the Patriot air defense systems. They've seen reports about critically important U.S. radar systems being destroyed by Iran during this year's war. And so if you're thinking rationally as an Israeli, you would be very concerned about Iran's ability to inflict catastrophic damage on the country. If anything, the emigration from Israel is likely to have accelerated this year. And by the way, I don't believe that these numbers are accurate. I think the Israeli government is perfectly capable of putting out fraudulent numbers to conceal the extent of the problem. And when I see how many Israelis are snatching up property in Greece and in Cyprus, something I've reported on extensively, others have reported on it as well, I suspect that the actual level of emigration is much higher now than what it was reported, or what it is being reported to have been in 2025. And I just want to point out that in November of 2023, within about 6 weeks of the genocide having been launched, I published a lengthy 2-part article in which I predicted that Israel was going to suffer a strategic defeat in its war with the axis of resistance. And ultimately, the way Israel would come to an end would be a massive exodus of Zionists from the genocidal colony, which would fatally compromise the ability of the Israeli regime to control the majority Palestinian population, and that out of the ashes of the genocidal Israeli colony would be reborn the state of Palestine, in which all peoples would live with equal rights. So that remains my prediction, and based on the information that's available, it appears to me that is precisely where Israel is heading. One other piece of news I'll share with you is that a German appeals court has just ruled that comparing Israel to Nazi Germany is not a violation of German law. It ruled this in a case in which a woman who had done just that, compared Israel to Nazi Germany, had been charged criminally by German authorities. At the trial level, the prosecution succeeded, but the decision was overturned. The German court held that this was protected speech under Germany's constitution. And of course, by any rational measure, Israel's behavior is entirely comparable to that of the Nazis. If you give them enough time, they probably will end up killing just as many people as the Nazis did too. Now, admittedly, at this stage, the numbers are nowhere near as great as the number of people killed by the Nazis in World War II. But as I say, it's just a question of when, not if. If we continue to allow Israel to engage in this satanic behavior and to enjoy complete impunity for its monstrous crimes, the death toll will continue to increase throughout the region and increase rapidly. And of course, the extreme danger of Israel ultimately resorting to nuclear weapons remains. So let us hope that we will ultimately, as Western citizens, come together and remove from power the Zionists who rule us, because unless and until we do that, our governments will continue not only to tolerate Israel's crimes, but to enable them in every conceivable way. For now, that's my report on the ongoing criminal war of aggression on Iran. In the interim, stay safe, and we'll be back to you later today or tomorrow with our latest discussion with friend of Reason to Resist, Lebanese geopolitical analyst Laith Marouf.